What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, January 8th, 2018, and start of a brand new week. And first of all, I want to thank Michael Herzog for that wonderful little mention of me and my show. That was very gracious of him, and obviously I returned the sentiment back to him as well. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And for those of you who are still inquiring, Claire is doing much, much, much better to all of our relief. And it was a little hairy there for a while, but she really is a lot better. So anyway, getting into the news here, Fire and Fury, it was a good name for Michael Wolff's book because that's what it's kicked up, a lot of fire and fury. And of course, if you read the preface to the book, he admits right in there that some of this stuff isn't true. His excuse is he just collected together all this gossip, is really what it is. It's gossip. And he put it out there for people to decide for themselves if it's true, which is nonsense. People out here in the rest of the country who don't personally know Donald Trump or the gossipers, we have no way to evaluate it. It's a pure piece of propaganda. And that was emphasized by an interview Michael Wolff did on BBC Radio over the weekend, in which he actually came out and said, the book will finally bring down this presidency. So that's what it is. It's the propaganda portion of this plan to somehow get Donald Trump out of the White House by impeachment, by 25th Amendment, by who knows what, and trying to convince the American people that he's this terrible individual that you should not feel sorry for. Interestingly enough, some of the corporate media is starting to pull back. The corporate media at first had breathlessly repeated some of the claims that were in there. CNBC now pulled back a little bit and basically said some of the facts just don't stack up. And the New York Times White House correspondent, Maggie Haberman, saying there are obvious discrepancies in the book. And so he's made himself a lot of money, essentially, with a lie. Now, meanwhile, Steve Bannon has now apologized for the comments that were quoted in the book. So apparently he really did say those things, whether he was angry, whether he was drunk, and he's now apologized for them. And he's come on back and said Donald Trump Jr. is both a patriot and a good man. He's been relentless in his advocacy for his father and the agenda that helped turn our country around. This is an interview in Xinhua, but strangely absent from the American corporate media. Now, WikiLeaks has done a lot of good work, but they did something that was very foolish over the weekend. They posted the entire text of Michael Wolff's book, and then they deleted it quickly. But you know the Internet. Once it's out there, it's out there. There's no getting it back. I've had this sent to me by almost a dozen different people. So it's gone around the net. And there's maybe a little poetic justice in there because I don't believe in making money with lies, fraud, and deception. And that's what Michael Wolff's book is. It's a fraud. It's a hoax. And I very much oppose the idea that he's getting rich on another scam. Of course, in our current economy, it almost seems like lies, fraud, and deception are the only growth industries left. Now, Robert Mueller is still continuing his probe into Trump-Russia collusion. He's found absolutely nothing, and a lot of people are really getting sick and tired of the whole mess. But he still wants to interview Donald Trump, and so representatives of Mueller and Trump's lawyers are basically in discussions on how this will be handled. And apparently the White House is pushing for a written list of questions to which will be given a written list of replies. I'm sure that Mueller would prefer to have a face-to-face on which he can hammer Trump, try and get him to lose his temper and say something rash. Speaking of Trump, there was actually a fire at the Trump Tower this morning. And it was up there at the very, very top. Firefighters responded, no injuries, and the fire has now been put out. It was right up on the very top floor. So no report on the cause of the fire just yet. Now, here's a story that ought to remind you why you should be very cautious about the corporate media. Okay? And basically, it turns out the Washington, D.C. press corps knew Hillary Clinton was behind the Russian dossier a full year before that information became public. A whole year. All these prostitutes and correspondents knew Hillary Clinton was behind this dossier, and they did not report that to the public. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, there is an upcoming Office of the Inspector General report, and it is likely to trigger a second special counsel looking into Comey, Lynch, and Clinton, specifically the very bizarre handling of the investigation into the email server. And the Department of Justice is taking a fresh look at the email matter. The FBI has launched a new investigation into the Clinton Foundation, and they're looking into James Comey's full Clinton memo, which has been released, revealing felony evidence of changes to portray Hillary Clinton's behavior as decriminalized, to make it seem like it wasn't as bad as it really was. I think that counts as obstruction of justice. So I'm skeptical looking at how the other investigations have been stymied, but a lot of people are seeing this as a very positive development. And over at Investment Watch blog, they had this story. This could be the year that justice is served. Well, I would have preferred justice having been served shortly after the crimes were committed, because justice delayed is justice denied. And I still would like to see somebody prosecuted for the murder of Deputy White House Counsel Vincent Foster. So anyway, they're now starting to probe the probers. They're looking at what's going on over in Mueller's office. Now, Congressman Matt Gaetz is out there saying the Clinton Foundation was just a money laundering operation for friends of Bill and Hillary. He was on Tucker Carlson Friday night talking about the investigation and saying the reason it did so little charity and the reason they hide what they're doing, it's a money laundering machine. And a lot of people, a lot of friends of the Clintons are involved with it. Remember what I said before, the reason there is so much protection for Hillary Clinton is they're protecting themselves. Everybody inside the Beltway, almost everybody inside the Beltway, they're dirty one way or the other. They're using the Clinton Foundation to launder money, or they got some part of the Uranium One deal, or some other part of the corruption. Certainly the CIA is concerned about the exposure of their gun and drug running operations, and that's why there is so much protection around the Clintons. And interestingly, though, considering how much she's been traveling around the country and, talking, all of a sudden Hillary has gone silent after the announcement of the new Department of Justice and FBI investigations. So has James Comey. Maybe they're actually getting nervous. Maybe they're getting ready to bug out, grab what cash they have on hand, head down to the Cayman Islands or some other place without extradition. Now, there's an interesting little article over at Zero Hedge purporting to explain why there will be no more free passes for the Clinton Foundation. And basically, the idea presented in this article is that all of the old cronies who stymied the earlier investigations, who blocked them off, they're no longer there. They've retired, they've moved on, they've been reassigned, and there's a whole bunch of new people who aren't closely connected to the Clintons. I mean, at the very least, the Clinton Foundation ought to lose its tax-exempt status, and that would make the Clintons personally liable for taxes on all that money. Now, James Comey, even though he has not practiced law in many, many years, he got his law degree from the University of Chicago, and apparently he may be disbarred over these memos that he leaked to the press that contained classified information. Now, from his point of view, it's probably going to be a wrist slap. I don't think he was intending to ever practice law again, or who knows, if he's kicked out of the government, he's got to do something for a living. Meanwhile, more and more voices are rising, demanding that Jeff Sessions be fired and prosecuted for obstruction of justice. And I tend to agree. I think Sessions is just another enabler, protector. He's not doing his job. I mean, he's trying to look like he's doing his job by going on the warpath against marijuana. That's his crusade. We're going to get the weed heads. But all these other crimes, doesn't seem interested at all. Just like Loretta Lynch. Only in Loretta Lynch's case, she was going to get those global warming deniers. That's how I prove I'm a good attorney general. We're going to go after those people who point at the snow and ask embarrassing questions. Now, here's the story, and once again, we have to go to the British press to get this. It turns out that the Huma Abedin emails found on Anthony Weiner's laptop were put there by a backup system. In other words, Huma Abedin or somebody working for her plugged that laptop into another machine and just copied everything over. And apparently there are indications of special dedicated backup software. And that's why there is so much of this mail that was on the laptop and being hidden from the people until Judicial Watch pulled it out. Here is the problem. Huma Abedin testified under oath that she did not copy the emails to Anthony Weiner's laptop. She said the same thing to FBI agents when she was interviewed by them. So now Huma is in some serious trouble. Until Jeff Sessions says she didn't mean to do wrong. Really, it was just an innocent mistake. And she just forgot she did the backup. So it wasn't really a lie. Have you ever noticed how everybody in Washington, D.C. has serious memory problems? It's epidemic. Oh, I don't recall. I don't remember that. Must be something in the water here. Now, Alan Dershowitz has come on out, and he's finally said something I actually agree with. And he's out there saying that psychiatrists and Democrats who are trying to impeach Trump for being unstable are behaving like Soviet and Chinese communists. And yes, that was a very common communist tactic to get rid of an enemy, is to declare them mentally ill and send them off to a happy home. And he's absolutely right about that. I mean, not to correct Dershowitz, but the Democrats and psychiatrists are not calling for Trump's impeachment for being unstable. They're trying to use the 25th Amendment. But it's the same end result. They want to get him on out because they're scared. These cover-ups are breaking open. The American people are very angry. The American people are demanding that if Donald Trump keeps one promise from his campaign, it's Hillary Clinton in jail. Now, over at Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton has made an interesting comment. He didn't clarify, didn't go into details, but he said the Clinton email scandal is worse than everyone expected. Well, what could be worse than leaking the nation's top secrets onto an unsecured email server, onto laptops? And again, this is reinforcing my theory as to what happened, which is that Hillary Clinton was recreating the 1996 Chinagate scam, selling U.S. secrets using her weak email server to deliver the goods, and her so-called charitable foundation to collect and launder the payments. So if I'm right, then so is Tom Fitton. The scandal is worse than everyone expected. Now, there is a journalist, Alec Boyd, and he went up against Fusion GPS at one point. And Fusion GPS, which presents itself as a research organization, a fact-finding organization, publicly smeared Alec as a pedophile, extortionist, and drug trafficker. No basis to any of this, but obviously when that shows up in the press, it's going to wreck a career, if not an entire life. And Alec Boyd, in an interview, said, "I believe that Fusion GPS's business is to do basically whatever the paymasters tell them to do." And this testimony came as a federal judge denied Fusion GPS's request to quash a congressional subpoena for the bank records, and those bank records have now been turned over. So that will get very interesting. Now, Abby Martin interviewed retired U.S. Army Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. He was the former National Security Advisor to the Reagan administration. He spent years as an assistant to Secretary of State Colin Powell during both Bush administrations. And basically during that interview said, this ship is sinking. Essentially, the U.S. empire is doomed. And I think we've all been seeing the signs of that for quite some time. What we have to do now is not let the United States government blow up the rest of the world in its death throes. We're going to take a phone call now. Chuck in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Being that you're my go-to guy for the latest of all information and opinions that I respect, which there are not many. If we stop supporting Trump and they get him under whatever, they impeach him, they get him under whatever, and remove him, is it really going to make any difference? Has he not disappointed us to the point where, hell, give us Pence? Whenever he picked Pence for his VP, I put out there publicly that I thought he just put a target on his empty forehead. Is it really going to matter? I mean, has he not betrayed us to the point where who cares?
Well, I care because I still believe in the rule of law, and I want the government to run by the rules, by the Constitution, and I'm sick and tired of dirty politics, which is what this is really all about. Yes, Trump is a disappointment. I'm very disappointed in him regarding the war agenda. I'm very disappointed that he's dissolved his Election Integrity Commission. I'm very disappointed that so far we're not hearing a whole heck of a lot from the Vaccine Safety Commission. And it does seem that who sits in the Oval Office has become irrelevant to that deep state, that core state that's pushing for all these wars. I think basically what the White House has become is, the crony in chief. They are just to hand out favors to their backers and supporters and loot the nation. That being said, I'm opposed to this idea of impeachment because it would be a very dangerous precedent for Congress to impeach the president basically because they don't like him, which is really what it all comes down to. Donald Trump hasn't done anything that would qualify as a high crime or misdemeanor justifying impeachment. If the government isn't going to follow the rules anymore, then it's already starting to collapse.
Well, I agree to a point. However, some time ago during the Obama administration, I said, well, let's just go ahead and let them do their stuff so that it'll shock the American people into actually action. And the most dangerous thing we could ever have is the next Republican, because then the people will go, oh, we got a Republican, Christian, blah, 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 and suddenly go back to sleep, which they have.
Hey, Chuck, got to put you on hold. Got to put you on hold and do a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Chuck in Texas about this movement among the liberal Democrats to find some way to impeach Donald Trump and undo the results of the election. And that is the motive. That is the agenda. Trump hasn't actually committed any high crime or misdemeanor that would justify impeachment. So they're looking for an excuse. And impeachment was written into the Constitution to punish high crimes and misdemeanors, not to have the Congress override the vote and kick him out just because they don't like him. And I'm fully in agreement. Donald Trump has been a tremendous disappointment. But I still want to see the government operating by the rules, by that Constitution. And I know they're ignoring much of it. But if they just start doing what they want to do without any restraint whatsoever, then that's going to be the beginning of the collapse, which I think is probably going to be a good thing because I don't favor armed rebellion. I don't want to see a civil war in the streets of America. And the current federal government is irredeemably corrupt. It is well past the point where it could be salvaged. And so basically it's time to have a cash for clunkers program where we send our old, bloated, costly government over to the junkyard, and we buy a new, smaller, more efficient government to replace it.
Okay, Mike, let me ask you, how do we, as you have said, how do you, I can't remember your wordage, how do you make a tyrant visible by making them act like a tyrant?
Yeah, the fastest way, the quote is, the fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force them to act like one where everybody can see it.
Absolutely. Now, let's go from there. While we have Trump, who admittedly is a complete failure to anyone who is a true libertarian thinker or an independent thinker, if we withdraw all of our support for Trump and let them tank this guy who has totally betrayed all of the major promises that he made to us. Let him tank. Let them do it. And then we won't have the people, all these Trumpsters, who are hung up on the cult of personality of Trump. If they
we'll have the people who are hung up on the personality cult of Hillary, dancing in victory in the streets. Let me be very clear about where I stand on this. If Donald Trump commits a high crime or misdemeanor, then yes, he should be impeached. I just see it as a dangerous precedent to say, oh, let the Congress kick him on out. Because first of all, I don't think the people would react all that much. I think a lot of Americans, they're waking up to what's going on, but they're almost suffering a burnout. They're just seeing so much of this crime and corruption happening all around them. I don't know that there would be a major public outcry.
You're not getting my point. The point is we have a large segment of the, quote, Christian Zionists and all these who are going to support Trump no matter what he does. If we allow him to fail, if we just withdraw our support and let them wipe him out, let them put Pence in, which is what's going to be next in line, not Hillary. She's toast. She's history. So is Obama. We have to deal with what's coming. But if they take Trump out against the Constitution, against everything that's right, we're going to make a great step forward in waking people up. Any continued support of this failed president, this man who lied to us, who has broken every major promise to us, while we let them keep the veneer of, quote, legality, while we know that they are not legitimate, while we see all of these things, I say throw him to the wolves because that's where he deserves. And now all of those people who are absolute Trumpers, no matter what he does, are going to make excuses for him, just like the Obamites did. Let them have him. Let them wipe him out and remove him from the presidency. Now we will gain the ear of the people who are just dyed-in-the-wool Trumpites. It's time to let the system expose itself. do not support Trump in anything. Just say, I don't care what they say about you. You're on your own. You betrayed me. And let him fail. And then you can talk to the people who are sold out Trumpites and say, see, we told you so. Are you ready to talk truth? Mike, I appreciate your show so much. Stay with us and keep doing your great work, my friend.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. And I've been very honest all during last year that the main reason I was supporting Donald Trump was really that I was opposing Hillary Clinton. And I'm still absolutely convinced if Hillary had won that election, things would be a lot worse on several fronts. Hillary was pro-war. Remember the way she cackled about Gaddafi. Anyway, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we get back to the phone lines, quick little story. Apparently, in a recent TV interview, Judicial Watch's Chris Farrell came right on out and said, Mrs. Clinton is a national security criminal. So, indications that I may indeed be correct in my theory about that email server. All right, let's go to the phone lines now. Frank in Pennsylvania, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, Michael, yes. Thank you for taking my call. And I was saying that Trump, this was on broadcast radio, he is ending temporary protective status for the El Salvador immigrants that came here in 2001. They've been here for 17 years under that status. So Trump is going to send them back. And, you know, of course, the media is wringing their hands that we can't send these people back. So I was curious. I was real curious, and I looked up El Salvador's GDP, their gross domestic product.
Yes.
2016, they pulled a 2.4% GDP. Oz was only 1.6. Their economy is growing faster than Oz, and people are wringing their hands about sending these people back. Are we out of our minds? My goodness, we're taking in people from, you know, actually economic refugees that are doing better than our own nation, Mike.
Well, the percentage offset can be a little bit misleading because they may have a 2% GDP against a base economy that is in very, very poor shape, as opposed to our 1% for an economy that is considerably larger to begin with. So that part is misleading. My question would be that if these El Salvadorans wanted to remain in this country, nobody ever expected that special protection to be permanent. Why did they not go through the process to become American citizens? And also my next question would be, is deportation mandatory, or are they given the option of starting the process to become American citizens? Because I imagine after 17 years, they're fairly well integrated into their communities.
Good questions. We don't know. We don't. I don't know. I don't think it's been discussed. But I can tell you, if 200,000 El Salvadorans leave, that's going to open up a heck of a lot of jobs for Native Americans that live here. You know, people who are born here or people that are here legally. That might be a good thing for the American people because I don't believe the unemployment numbers. I think that we're a much higher unemployment rate.
Yes.
And I know a lot of Americans, especially the younger kids, Mike, they're getting out of college, and you're right. They're doing minimum wage jobs with 4-year degrees. There's just not the jobs out there that were promised. So, you know, I can see this working in the American people's favor. I know that these people were here for 17 years, but they've been here for 17 years. They should have went through the process, like you said, to become legal citizens, or maybe they just weren't interested, or maybe they were hoping, you know, to continue it the way it was for the past 17 years. But in any case, it's still better for our people because I'd rather have legal citizens here than these temporary protective status or these HB1 visas in here. They've been really, really hurting the American wage, especially the middle class.
Yeah, they have, plus the flood of illegal immigrants, and they're still busting people for hiring them, plus all these refugees who are being brought in under various special status programs that allow them to work. They're all competing for jobs with Americans. And it basically creates a climate in which there are so many surplus workers that employers can get away with all kinds of abuses, and nobody dares complain.
No, Absolutely, absolutely. And what it does is it's breaking the middle class.
Yes.
It's breaking it down to the point where the middle class doesn't, when we were growing up, when we were kids, one wage earner handled an entire family. We had 5 in our family. Mm-hmm. But today, it's 2 wage earners, and it's like they're living worse than they were when, I was a kid in the 50s and 60s growing up. So yeah. I agree. Anything that brings wages up is a good thing for the American people. And these visa programs, these lotto visa programs and these temporary protective status programs and HB1 visa programs, all been hurting the people. And I'm kind of glad that Trump is doing that. He is tying it down on that. I mean, there's a lot of things I disagree with the president. There's some things I agree with him.
Yes.
But on this subject matter, I'm 100% with President Trump. Have them become legal citizens, wait in line, and if there's a need for these type of people and their job skills, we should bring them in. But if there's not a need for them and they're just going to work the menial jobs that our people should be working, they should go back home.
I agree with you. And again, yes, I'm disappointed in Donald Trump, but I agree with some of the things he's done. In particular, the renewed emphasis on NASA, because that is going to be a civilian technology incubator from which new products, new materials, new industries, new jobs will be springing forth from in the coming years.
Yes, it is. And you worked for NASA, right, Mike,
Many years ago, yes.
Well, they've done a lot of wonderful things, and our technology has jumped leaps and bounds with NASA, and I agree with the president. We should have a national interest, and that should be in exploration of space. And a lot of it came out of NASA. A lot of good things came out of NASA.
Well, the whole tech boom of the 70s, 80s, and 90s was created by solving all the problems of building a spacecraft light enough, small enough to get to the moon and back. Integrated circuits, all kinds of stuff like that. And we need a new technology incubator because, unfortunately, American industrialists, CEOs, foolishly said, we don't need to make this stuff here in this country. We'll just license it off and sell off the know-how to other countries. Those countries will not return the favor. They know that the making of jobs is what produces a strong economy, not just having a license on the technology. So we've got to come up with something new. The next step in computers may well be photonics. We should be working on that. I know some people are. But getting out into space again and solving the problems involved with that, we're going to see a new tech boom.
Mike, you bring up a good point. When we were nations with boundaries and borders and we competed against each other, different nations, it kind of brought out the best in humanity. When we're like this one nation, one world order, it's just awful because it really skews the competitiveness in human nature. If you think about human nature, we are competitive people.
Yes.
And, when our country was, pushing out in the 50s and 60s some technology, and then Russia gained the upper hand a little bit, and then we came back, I think it was better like that because I think in the end result was much better technology, and people could better their lot in life.
Well, competition is always a good thing because if you have multiple businesses engaged in the same business, they're going to be competing to make their products more attractive to consumers, and that means lower prices and better quality. The same thing is true for the international community when they have competition. Each country will be trying to produce more attractive products for global marketplaces than the country next door. And that really is the downside of globalism in the New World Order. If you studied the sociology of what was going on in the Soviet Union, where everything was under the control of this one central planner, competition was lost, and basically the society stagnated.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And what kept America supposedly great was our competitiveness. We constantly reinvented things. The automobile, I mean, look at that, how far it came.
Yes.
And I think that we lost a lot of that.
The United States did not invent the automobile. That was invented by Daimler Benz in Germany.
You're right. Well,
what Henry Ford invented was the assembly line.
Yes, you're right. You're correct. And it reinvented itself with the assembly line and radio, you look at back in the 20s and 30s, how far it advanced. It was better like that, I think, because it brought out the best in people to work as more of a nationalistic goal, to create good products. Today, the products in America, we don't create very good products because we depend a lot of our products from China and Asian nations and even in Central and South America, which kind of made us give up that forefront, and that's a shame. That really is a shame. Because
Along
we got
with
really
a huge trade imbalance. Anyway, listen, I'm going to have to let you go. We've got people waiting patiently on the phone line. So thank you for the phone call, and we're going to switch over to Joe in Rhode Island. Joe, thank you for waiting so patiently. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Mike. A couple of quick things, Mike. The China Sea. There was a collision between a Chinese ship and an Iranian ship. With this technology today, you don't see ships colliding too much. And I'm wondering, is there more to that collision than a fire? And it shows the close relationship between Iran and China these days, and I'll wait for your comment on that.
Well, you're absolutely right. The fact that the ships collided shows how dense those sea lanes are right now, and maybe there needs to be an advance in technology to keep the ships more properly separated away from each other. Ultimately, I think it'll come down to the bridge crew on one or the other of the ships just weren't paying attention. And it's like the Exxon Valdez accident. They had all the whiz-bang technology, but in the end it came on down to the captain just not paying attention. So, with global tracking...
Or could it be...
I'm sorry?
Or could it be, Mike, that there was more than a transfer of oil? Maybe there was some other... transactions going on.
Well, I favor Occam's razor. I look for the simplest explanation for the available facts. And I read about this collision, and, my first thought was somebody was asleep at the ship's wheel again.
Like one other quick thing, California, many earthquakes, 3.1 larger. Mount St. Helens experiencing quite a large earthquake, 3.9. Mount Rainier is experiencing earthquakes. Any information that you could give us on that?
Well, first of all, for somebody who spent much of his youth in Southern California, a magnitude 3 quake isn't all that bad. But yeah, there has been an uptick in seismic activity along both the San Andreas Fault and the Cascade Fault. And the Cascade Fault is actually considered potentially more destructive if it were to rip loose. The activity at Rainier and Mount St. Helens could be signaling renewed eruptions. Mount St. Helens, it's dormant at the moment, but it's still showing steam and various other materials, pyroclasts, coming out at the top. The real big question is the magma plume underneath Yellowstone, which extends up toward that direction. And when you look at that row of volcanoes along that Cascade mountain ridge, there's obviously something going on deep in the earth underneath. It is a classic subduction zone with subduction zone volcanoes all over it. People are very concerned about Yellowstone exploding someday, probably not in our own lifetime, but it will happen eventually. The issue is what could possibly set it off. And if that magma plume actually does intersect or interact with those volcanoes at Rainier and Mount St. Helens, we could see, you'll pardon the expression, the cascade effect.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike.
All right, well, thank you very much. I mean, in the end, the Earth is going to do what the Earth is going to do. And that, I think, properly shows humankind's proper place in the pecking order of things here. All right, let's go to Kathleen in Paris. Kathleen, thank you for waiting so patiently, and what is on your mind today?
Oh, hi. It's okay. I heard the now. I heard the noise. Well, you were talking about a quickest way to show a dictator. Well, I mean, I don't think that Trump is a dictator. The dictator is up above him. I mean, we've come to that conclusion that the president is not the one calling the shots.
Yes, we have, and I specifically use the word dictatorship to avoid the idea of there being just one, because the Soviet Union was a dictatorship, and they had their leader out front, like Stalin, but everybody on the Politburo, they were part of the dictatorship. A dictatorship can be hundreds and possibly even thousands of people.
I see, yeah. But if we get rid of, if we get him out and there's another election or whatever, I mean, the big problem is that there's no confidence in our elections.
No, there isn't. There isn't any. They've been discredited.
So isn't that the big problem?
It is a big problem, and that's why I'm very upset that Trump dissolved his Election Integrity Commission, supposedly under the excuse that the states were just not cooperating with providing voting records. Well, I think if a federal grand jury were convened, they could subpoena those records, and the states would have no authority to refuse. But Trump's just not being aggressive on this issue, just like he's not being as aggressive as I would like on the border issue or prosecution of Bill and Hillary Clinton and all of their cronies.
Can I change the subject?
Sure.
You were talking about competition and the benefits of it, and I understand that, but what about this idea I'm hearing floated about open source everything?
I think it would be a wonderful idea because what we're getting in terms of product from closed source companies tends to be very bad. It tends to be sold with all kinds of problems already built in. See, one of the good things, in the early days of computer animation, you couldn't go to the store and buy a cut of Maya or 3D Studio Max. Everything was written in-house, and that meant we could adapt it, we could adjust it, we could fix the problems, and move the whole system forward. And I think people are talking about open source software, and there's a lot of it out there, like OpenOffice. And they're talking about right to repair legislation, where products arrive, it's possible to open them up and replace certain parts yourself. And I think that would be a very good idea as well. Okay?
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thanks an awful lot.
Bye.
We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as one of our previous callers mentioned, we do have a problem with our election system, and the American people are now becoming aware of it. Now, to be very honest and accurate, election fraud is nothing new. Stolen elections happen. In fact, the Battle of Athens was triggered by election fraud. So it's been along there. And we know there's a huge amount of it going all the way back to the Clinton administration. And there was a book that was written called Vote Scam by the Collier brothers. And the Collier brothers made their fortune with a line of tanning products, and then they basically sold out. One of them ran for office, was soundly defeated, and became very suspicious as to what had happened. And they launched an investigation, and they wrote this book about how manipulating elections is just standard practice here in the United States and in other countries. The CIA rigs elections in other countries all the time. Well, the growing public awareness of this is an issue, because if we no longer believe that the people who are sitting in Congress or the White House are the people we voted for, then we're going to stop listening to them. And so along with the dissolving of the Voting Integrity Commission, there's a big push on out there to reassure us all that there may be a few little problems here and a few little problems there, but our elections are essentially honest and we can trust the results. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. Now, Mike Pompeo, over at the CIA, says that what we're seeing go wrong with the elections, it's all the fault of Russia. Russia's coming in here, and they're manipulating the elections. We would never do such a thing, but Russia, they're evil. And so he's out there saying Russia and others are trying to undermine U.S. elections. So there's going to be a sales campaign to reassure you our election system is fundamentally honest, and if anything looks like it was crooked, blame it on Russia. And General McMaster, is out there saying that Russia is meddling in Mexico's elections. I think it's far more likely the United States is meddling in those elections. And for those of you who are concerned about this problem, I just reposted my article, How to Have Honest Elections, to the front of whatreallyhappened.com. And I urge you to please, first of all, read it, and if you agree with it, please forward it on. Because the first step to establishing an honest election system in this country is to educate the American people that the system we have now is not honest. It is not fair, it is not accurate, it is not trustworthy. All right, moving on down here. Interesting little article out of FortRuss.com about why the U.S. is losing the information war. And it's talking about how the U.S. government has been trying to manipulate new media, blogs and tweets with various paid trolls and automated systems, trying to keep the propaganda being catapulted forward. But because of a skeptical user community, the obvious falsehoods are very quickly found out and dropped. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And today the corporate media is all abuzz about Oprah 2020. And apparently at the Golden Globe Awards, she did a 9-minute speech, and all of a sudden it's all over the media. She wants to run for president. And I think this really shows how distorted our political system has become. And I've already seen jokes circulating around the net about how she's black, she's a woman, she's a lesbian, she's got all the qualifications the left needs in a chief executive here. But apparently NBC tweeted out, or rather implied in a tweet, that Oprah will actually run for the presidency. And really, it's getting silly out there. All right, let's talk about the war zones, because there's a lot of stuff going on out there. The Syrian army has liberated a large area and a key town in southern Idlib. And apparently the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham's defense totally collapsed. And the Syrian government forces liberated the town of Sinjar and nearby villages including Al-Nasira, Jebel al-Kafi, Lubaida, Hawa, Sheikh Baraka, Mulaya, I'm not even going to try that one, Tel Amarna, and a bunch of others. So this is pretty much over. There is a problem, however, and that is that the United States government is once again talking about an autonomous Kurdish region carved out of Syria. And I'm sure the Syrian government, aided by Russia, are going to say, no, it's none of your business what goes on in Syria. The U.S. government doesn't want to give up. They don't want to admit they got defeated in Syria, because that would destroy the momentum for the wars yet to come. So they'll pour men and money into Syria. Same thing with Afghanistan. They don't want to admit they've lost those. They'll just stay on the ground and say, well, we may not be winning, but we're not losing. America doesn't lose wars, not counting Vietnam and the Korean War. Now, apparently over in Iran, Major General Muhammad Ali Jafari, commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, is slamming the allegations that Iran is sending missiles to Yemen basically pointing out how impossible that would actually be because of all the surveillance in the area, all the radar, the fact that Yemen is totally closed off by air. But again, prior to the attack on Iran, they have to be demonized. Same thing with Russia. Story coming out of Mint Press News here. Apparently, on the last Hannity show, they had a bunch of Iran hawks out there saying, arm the Iranian protesters, just drop in guns, let them have guns. And sadly, I thought Fox News was becoming a little bit more centered and real, but apparently these Iran hawks were also Iraq hawks. They were all over the TV saying, yes, we have to go get those nuclear weapons. And I thought Fox News was raising above fake news, but apparently not here. Now, over in Pakistan, they are continuing to respond to Donald Trump's cutting of financial aid to them. The first thing that they did, which we reported last week, is they've already established a direct trading agreement with China based on the yuan. And now apparently what they're doing is they're going to expel over 1.5 million Afghan refugees in the next 30 days. This is going to pour them back into Afghanistan, push Kabul closer to collapse, and consequently, they're going to be filling the Taliban's ranks of supporters. So that didn't work out too well. Apparently, Israel's Netanyahu is now urging the United Nations to end the UN Palestine Refugee Agency. In other words, now that Donald Trump is talking about cutting off all funding to the Palestinian Authority, Israel wants the United Nations to basically impose even more hardship on the people. Right now in Gaza, because they are dependent on Israel for electricity, because Israel bombed their own indigenous power station 2 or 3 wars ago, they only have electricity for 6 hours a day. That's all Israel will give them. Meanwhile, over in Egypt, an Egyptian intelligence officer has been calling talk shows in Egypt and saying that Egypt might accept the Jerusalem move. Said strife with Egypt was not in Egypt's national interest. True enough, but Israel likes strife, so strife is coming anyway. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network here. Now, Israel has passed a new bill to make it more difficult for anybody other than Jews to have land in Jerusalem. And this new bill says 2/3 of the Knesset majority is required for Israel to relinquish sovereignty over any part of Jerusalem. Now, of course, under international law, Israel has no sovereignty over East Jerusalem, which has been illegally occupied and annexed in 1967 and 1980, respectively. An equally disturbing part of the bill is it removes 2 Palestinian neighborhoods from the municipal jurisdiction of the city. Basically sends them back over to being part of the West Bank. And the 2 affected neighborhoods are Kufr Aqab and the Shufat refugee camp. So already the argument is building over East Jerusalem's status. Sudan has deployed thousands of their militiamen on a border with Eritrea. And they're using the Rapid Support Forces. And apparently, eyewitnesses are saying that the RSF are using tanks and hundreds of vehicles with weapons, mounted weapons, arriving in the city. And apparently, Sudan is deploying these forces in anticipation of internal Eritrean developments that could lead to a large wave of refugees coming across the border. Now, as you know, all of a sudden, North Korea and South Korea are making nice. Donald Trump tried to take credit for it. And now Donald Trump is saying, yeah, well, he'll talk to Kim Jong-un, no problem. He's just backed off this more aggressive do what I say or else attitude. But there's a very interesting story, and this came out of CNBC, saying that North Korea may suddenly want talks because it has become militarily powerful. And I speculated about this when this whole North Korea thing was starting to be fanned up, that North Korea would be more interested in negotiating from a position of strength. And according to this article in CNBC, that seems to be happening. Now, other people are taking a much more fearful tone here. Over at the Atlantic, they're talking about the unexpected return of duck and cover. Now, 60 years ago, in 1951, there was a film produced for the federal government Civil Defense Agency. It was done in response to Soviet nuclear tests, and it featured an animated turtle named Bert and other real-life people from across the country, mostly from New York. And Duck and Cover became an icon of the Cold War. And yes, I watched it when I was in school. It's still out there on YouTube if you want to hunt it on down. Some of it seems very dated and a little silly today. But if you're interested in this topic, I would also recommend The Atomic Cafe. This was a documentary that came out in the 1970s, and it was considered so alarming that briefly the U.S. government tried to block it and censor it, but they failed on that one. But all of a sudden, the American people are having to confront the reality. There could be another war. There could be a nuclear war. Not just North Korea, but we're talking Russia and China. And you need to remember just how dangerously close we came to that during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, having lived through that whole thing myself, it does weigh upon you. And here in Hawaii, where we're very much closer to North Korea than you are, it does weigh on people's minds. Now, after World War II was over and before the Soviet Union got the bomb, everybody was relaxed. There's no more war, no danger of war, no danger of being bombed. And then the Soviets got the secret of the atomic bomb from the Rosenbergs, and everybody was building fallout shelters. Okay, here's an article. This is from Information Clearinghouse, and it says, "Are our leaders really that stupid?" And they're talking about last year's PBS series, The Vietnam War, which was very horrific to watch, and basically sent a message. Massive airstrikes, bombing, and napalm that killed civilians turned the citizenry against the United States, which you would expect it to do. When Adolf Hitler sent the V-1 and V-2 over to London, he was convinced that the fear the weapons created would cause the British people to put pressure on their government to capitulate to Germany's terms. And the exact opposite happened. The missile attacks hardened the resolve of the British people. There are plenty of historical precedences for people just willing to go all the way when a conflict breaks up. Look at the Japanese, who, prior to the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, appeared ready to fight all the way to the death. And, you know, when the Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed, the shock was it was a single bomb. But it wasn't the worst bombing. The firebombing of Tokyo killed many more people. So the point of this article is that the methodology that we used in Vietnam, massive airstrikes, bombings, killing civilians, didn't work. Even the people whom the United States was supposed to be helping in Vietnam grew to hate the U.S. presence in the country. So why are we following the same strategy in all these other countries we're at war with? Massive airstrikes, bombings, killing of civilians. When do people learn? All right, we're going to talk about the economy a little bit here. The global debt is estimated to have hit a record $233 trillion. U.S. taxpayers are on hook each for $921,000 in unfunded liabilities. Here we see the end result of allowing a privately owned central bank to create the public currency out of thin air and then loan it into circulation at interest. The debt grows faster than the available money supply. And it doesn't matter how you shuffle the debt around the world from one country to the other. Sooner or later, it is unsustainable. And we are there. We're there. Now, apparently, the Bank of Japan is starting to back off from their program of quantitative easing. And the total assets on their balance sheet actually inched down a little bit from the end of November. And it's a small amount, but it does signal a desire to get off that quantitative easing trap, that overstated balance sheet. And the Federal Reserve, of course, is talking about winding back all the quantitative easing. But a lot of people are very alarmed that any walking back, any raise on interest by the Federal Reserve could trigger a market crash. It's incredibly fragile over there. It's incredibly fragile. And putting more pressure on the U.S. economy is signs that China will issue a gold-backed currency this year. And you know that other countries are going to want to trade with that rather than the U.S. paper dollar. Harley Schlanger is out there with a comment that we are in terms of our economy, a giant Ponzi scheme. And he says the physical economy is not growing, and he's absolutely right. We're seeing the numbers forced up by manipulation, but the actual economy, the physical economy, is not growing. We're not seeing a lot of new construction. We're not seeing a lot of new factories. According to a story out of Dr. Housing Bubble, 30% of working adults are now living with a roommate. And in some cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles, it may be 2 or 3 roommates just to pay the rent. Now, we had that caller early in the day who was talking about in the good old days where, you know, the husband had a job and he brought home the money and the household was able to function. And today, even 2 incomes might not get you there, even 2 professional level incomes in some of these cities like Silicon Valley. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from Frank in North Carolina. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I apologize for breaking up the subject matter here, but back to the war thing for just a moment. I was always a big fan of the Twilight Zone
So was I.
series from the 1960s. Yeah, I grew up on that. And I recently watched an episode that I don't think they play very often because I don't recall ever having seen it. Ever. I wasn't even aware of it. But it starred, I don't know the one guy's name, but I've seen him in a lot of old westerns. Usually plays like a redneck or a bad guy cowboy or something.
Okay.
But he played the GI veteran of Pacific Theater, island hopping, Okinawa, et cetera. And this is set in contemporary times. The other character, I think they were the only actual 2 actors in this episode. There was no one else, and it took place mostly in an attic where this guy was cleaning. And anyway, this Japanese guy comes in, played by, I'm sure you'll know his name from the other show from the 60s, Star Trek. The guy that played Sulu.
Yes. George Takai.
Well, he was the guy. Yeah, right. He played like a landscaper, and he was looking for business. And he said, "Well, I can cut your yard for $8 a month. Somebody said you might be interested." And anyway, there's a samurai sword involved and whatever. But anyway, they end up getting into it, and it's quite a show. But I'm sure it was probably very controversial, and they probably didn't want to show that very much. But anyway, it just basically deals with their demons with one another, and they end up getting into a fight. Because the one guy's father was, in the war. The Japanese guy, his father was in the war. And, but anyway, the GI admits at one point that, hey, look, we were told not to take any prisoners. We killed everybody. And, you say that the Japanese, wouldn't surrender. And I also have to wonder how much of that was because, I used to think it was just propaganda, that they were propagandized, that we wouldn't take prisoners and that we would do this and that to them and, the torture would be horrific and all that. But I wonder, how much of that was actually true, that we did torture the Japanese, because,
there's no question. Stay on the line. Stay on the line. We got to do a break for commercials. I'm going to come back to you after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And once again, if you would like to support Republic Broadcasting, the postal address for check or money order is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. If you want to phone in and become a recurring subscriber, the number is 800-724-2719, extension 03. Now, we're talking here with Frank in North Carolina. We're talking about an episode of Twilight Zone, which I think, like most kids, was a favorite show here. And the specific episode we're talking about is called The Encounter. And it basically aired on May 1st, 1964, and it was responded to because of the issue of racism. It was not allowed to go into syndication. And so you're right. It's something that nobody has seen in all of these replays and the rest of it. Apparently, January 1st, 2016, the episode was finally re-aired as part of Sci-Fi Channel's annual Twilight Zone New Year's Eve Marathon. One aspect of the story that should be mentioned, apparently the story focuses around the samurai sword having some kind of strange effect on people who hold it. And they get into this argument, and unfortunately they both die. So, anyway. Frank, are you there? Frank, are you there? Did we lose Frank? All right, looks like it. Phone lines are open, and let us get back to the news here. All right, well, let's talk about the economy a little bit here. Regis is going to be closing 600 of their salons in Walmarts. I don't know if you go to Walmart or not. Every once in a while, we do. Because of the prices of prescription medication are really low there compared to other places. And it does sometimes look like Walmart has an identity crisis because you go on in there and you'll see these little sections carved out for other businesses. There's a McDonald's, there's an eyeglass place, there's a nail salon, there's a hair salon. And apparently, at least one of the operators of these salons has decided they're not getting enough traffic. And so they're going to be closing 600 of their salons in Walmarts, which I'm sure Walmart will quickly fill with something else. Now, apparently economic analyst John Sneeson, he's part of the financial sector, and he's concerned about a recent warning from Morgan Stanley that there will likely be a correction in global stocks this year. And apparently Morgan Stanley recently sold off all of their junk bond holdings. And the CIO, Mike Wilson, said this: while the tax cuts just enacted in the U.S. may lead to better growth in the short term, they may also bring forth the excesses we typically see before a recession, which is something credit markets figure out before equities. As a result, we recently took our remaining high-yield positions to zero as we prepare for deterioration in lower quality earnings in the U.S., led by lower operating margins. And then he commented, investors should prepare for at least one correction in global stocks this year. Now, that brings me to another point. There was an article that we had on whatreallyhappened.com today where everybody is caught up in Bitcoin mania. It looks like, all right, we'll take Frank after the next commercial break. People are so caught up in Bitcoin mania, they're apparently going into debt to buy Bitcoin. That is probably one of the most foolish things anybody can do, is to go into debt for investment capital. And I know there are a lot of players on Wall Street who do that, and they make a lot of money in the long run. But every once in a while, they'll hit gambler's ruin, and you see them falling off the top of multi-story parking structures. If you're going to be an investor, you've got to have risk capital. That means money you don't need to live on, and certainly not money that you've borrowed. Because I'm still smelling tulips around Bitcoin. I have to be very, very honest. Story coming out of the sounding line. Accounting for reality, pension funds are in big trouble. And this article is talking about how public sector workers, what they pay into pension funds and the amount they receive in benefits, it's starting to divide. And employee contributions to public sector pension funds can be as little as 3% for the first 10 years of work and nothing after, while the benefits are often as much as 70%. Obviously, there is a true disparity between money flowing into the pensions and money flowing out. Now, supposedly, wise and prudent investment would make up that stopgap. But we saw that all wrecked back in 2008 with the mortgage-backed security fraud. So if you're depending on a pension fund for retirement, you may be in a little bit of trouble. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with phone calls after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our program here, and we're going to go to the telephone lines now. Frank in North Carolina. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I never hung up, actually, from my call earlier.
Well, there was a technical glitch.
But anyway, yeah, you indeed had the episode. You found that right away. It was the encounter, and it was only those two guys, and it was about, everything that happened from the attack on Pearl Harbor and after that. And the Japanese guy, he was dealing with the demons of his father, who had, he didn't want to deal with it, that his father had been a spy for Japan. So he basically, his father was a traitor. And then the other guy was dealing with his demons because he had killed people under the training that he had undergone. We don't take any prisoners. And, he never got over it. He was dealing with those demons. But anyway, that's interesting that the story that you tell about it being taken out of syndication, because I knew I would have seen that sometime over the past 40 plus years since I started watching The Twilight Zone. And I wonder, too, if one of the reasons it was taken out of syndication was also about, that narrative in the, I don't know if it's historically accurate or not, but that, we were not taking prisoners. We were just, shooting everyone, killing everyone.
Well, the first thing that occurs to me is we all know about the internment camps that were built for the Japanese Americans in the American West and on the island of Oahu. But it occurs to me, I've never really seen any historical photos of any large Japanese POW camps. American camps for Japanese POWs. And you have to think about what a logistics problem it is during that island hopping part of the war. Because to move all those captured prisoners anywhere significant, you're going to be using up ships and fuel and manpower. And so there might actually be something to that story.
Right. I was thinking the same thing. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Andrea in Oklahoma. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha.
Aloha.
I find, aloha. Last night when I didn't see them mention it, but I've heard that Oprah was planning on possibly running for president. The thing is, she is a part of this eugenics, the secret billionaires clubs that wants to have population control. And the only article, of course, I don't know how many things that if you put something into the computer that's, damaging, I guess, to the rich, they're trying to avoid that you can find it. But I was able to find this article that goes back. It was published in 2009, and that Oprah Winfrey, Bill Gates is a part of that group, and you pay big money to be a part of that group. The David Rockefeller, Ted Turner, Oprah Winfrey, Warren Buffett, George Soros, Michael Bloomberg. These people are trying to eliminate at least 85, if not 90% of the population. And she is a part of the one world government. And I just thought I would throw that in so everybody could think about that's listening.
Well, thank you for the information here. I don't think anybody should take Oprah seriously as a presidential candidate. She's a TV presenter, a very successful TV presenter, but that's her background. And she would be a disaster. She would be an absolute disaster as president. There's no question about that.
Well, what about Bill Gates and his wife, if they were made president? If they want to eliminate at least 85% or 90%, or Warren Buffett, any of these people that are part of this club that they pay big money to be in, and this is even George Soros. What if he decided to be president? All of these people that are part of this group are wanting to get rid of a lot, you, me, and everybody else that they consider below them.
Useless eaters.
And so when we look at Oprah, or at least when I look at Oprah, and I was listening to your show back in 2009. Well, I started listening in 2008 during TARP. That was one of your stories, and I've kept that thought, because you look at her, she's smiling, she seems sweet, but evidently there's a lot going on back there in her mind that maybe she doesn't like all the people that get in her way, and when she's trying to drive or go somewhere and stuff, and how wonderful the world would be with less than 85%.
Well, there's a lot of people out there who think that the Earth would be a much more pleasant place with fewer humans. You've got the Georgia Guidestones that say the global human population should be limited to just $500 million. And I agree. The planet's overcrowded, and there's always going to be a population problem because sex is a lot more fun than dying. The issue that I have with everybody who's screaming about population reduction is that they're out there insisting that somebody else go without children or somebody else stop living sooner. And so I really cannot get behind that. But, we're coming up on a world war that might just resolve that matter all by itself.
Well, personally, I don't think that that's a bad idea. Just if people only had one or two children, because they are so expensive, what's the problem there?
Well, the problem there is that people who are aware of the population issue or under a stressed economy like we are, they are only having 2 children. Then you have people in other countries who are agricultural, and if you're growing up on a farm, the more kids you've got, the better, because the kids do the chores. Children are literally wealth to a farming community. And you've got that. Then you've got various religions that are out there saying that if you use birth control or have an abortion, it's a sin against the gods and you will go to the dark regions. So not everybody is fully on board with this idea of population management, which is why you have people like Bill Gates and these others out there saying we have to force this through.
Yeah, I don't believe that that's the right way to go at it. I think I only stopped with one child, and that was challenging enough with just having and trying to raise one child, get them through school. Of course, you've got all the rebellious things that they do, but that's built in. God made them that way, so they get out on their own. And then, but he eventually decided to go to college. I supported that once he showed me he really meant it, and he came out a mathematician and science. He's math and science. He's a teacher, and he gets to deal with those students that just were like him.
Yeah, I went through that experience myself.
Oh.
Well, Andrea, I mean, I've never fathered a child, at least that I'm aware of, and it's been one of the disappointments in my life. Anyway, listen, we need to let you go. The phone lines are loading up here, and we're going to switch over to Steve in Texas. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Steve, are you there?
Lost Steve, Mike.
We lost Steve. Let's switch over to Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I heard your caller a couple callers ago talking about taking prisoners in the Pacific War and so on during the Second World War, and I know that you're pretty knowledgeable about this. So, but one of the factors, several of the factors are the Bushido thing for the Japanese. Which
yes.
They didn't honor anybody who didn't take prisoners. They did not become prisoners themselves. The experience that our guys had when the Bataan Death March, what happened then became well known. We had on the Macon Island raid in early 1942, we had prisoners that were left behind that were beheaded and killed. The people on Wake Island that were taken in early, late 41 actually, were executed. There was a patrol within the first 10 days of the Guadalcanal campaign where a lieutenant colonel named Frank Getka, Goetge, lived out of Columbus, Ohio, was the intelligence officer for the 1st Marine Division, and somebody came in, a laborer came in, said there were Japanese who wanted to be taken prisoner. They took a boat around the island, and this patrol of about 25 or 30 people were ambushed and killed almost to the last man. There were 2 or 3 survivors, but from then on, it was a absolute war to the death. The Marine Corps didn't take any, the Army didn't take any. If you ever watch the old World at War thing, when they have the Pacific War, Island War, on the old Laurence Olivier narrated thing, there's an Army officer who's saying, briefing the troops before going into battle, and he's saying, if you guys have to take any risk at all to take a prisoner, he goes, then don't take them. And we didn't take prisoners, they didn't take prisoners, and it was as a matter of fact, there was a book on this title called War Without Mercy,
mm-hmm.
Race and Power in the Pacific War, by a guy named Dower, War Without Mercy by Dower, and going into just how much more brutal it was in the Pacific than it was in the European theater. And then
in Europe, everybody was playing by the rules. There was some restraint. It was sort of a civilized war, if you can actually conceive of such a thing. But yeah, in the Pacific, it was brutal and savage and to the death. And I think Okinawa is a good example where, I mean, the Japanese just refused to surrender, and they were eventually all killed.
Just the very nature of also the racial aspect of it, but then there's the nature of the combat itself, where you're thrown on an island, there's nowhere off.
Yes.
In Europe, you could back up, you could, but this is, you're in a phone booth, and that was it. The winner came out of the phone booth, and there was no, strategic withdrawal in any of those islands. So it was a really savage thing, and I know you know all that, but this is for the edification maybe of some of the people in the audience.
Well, it really validates some of the things I wondered about. I mean, I'm not really a war buff. I don't spend a lot of time studying the great battles and so forth. Over the course of my years, I've had occasion to learn a few, some of the battles, some of the famous battles and the mistakes that were made. But I wouldn't call myself a student of war.
Well, you know, you're a lot more knowledgeable than most. I can tell you that, Mike.
Well, thank you.
But at any rate, I just thought I'd chime in on that, what was your impression on the Oprah thing? You know, why not Whoopi Goldberg?
Yeah, I'd go for Whoopi Goldberg before I would go for Oprah Winfrey, mostly because of the way Oprah Winfrey shamelessly exploited the militant feminist movement of the 1990s. I mean, she was out there pushing this whole thing, oh, men are rapists and this and that, but again, Whoopi Goldberg, and at least when I met her, she was a very nice person, because that was a long time ago. Again, she's a comedian, very brilliant one, and an actress. But again, we need somebody in that Oval Office that knows how to do the job and isn't just going in there to cover up a massive multi-generational crime spree.
Mike, where are we going? Starting with, I guess, Ronald Reagan, you know, an actor, and I can remember when Bill Clinton was elected, and all the Hollywood stuff. I can remember Barbara Streisand went out and hired herself a political consultant because she had entree to the Clinton White House. Yes. And so all this stuff going on and now we've got Trump, who's a reality TV guy, and so is that what we're sentenced to from now on? Are these faux, ridiculous, personalities on television?
Well, Trump only did the one reality TV show, and he spent most of his life as a businessman, which I thought was going to give him some of the smarts he would need to be president. But I was saying during last year's campaign, my concern was that he was going into the White House as naive about how Washington, D.C. really works as Jimmy Carter. But you're right, all of this began with Ronald Reagan. I lived in California at the time when he was governor and then running for president. And it was like it was this big joke, this guy who'd been an actor. Of course, he had also been governor of California, and before that he'd been president of one of the major Hollywood, Screen Actors Guild, I think it was, Screen Actors Guild. So he had some administrative governing experience prior to running for president, but all of a sudden we have these people like George Clooney and Oprah, who are out there saying, all I got to do is look good and smile, and I will get to be the president.
Man, where are we headed? Kardashians for president? Why not?
Well, yeah. Boy, that would be a sight there. Where I think we're headed is, I think we're headed for a Soviet Union-style collapse. And every day that passes, I'm more and more convinced that's in our immediate future. It could even happen as soon as this year, especially if all of these investigations, somebody starts talking and turning state's evidence like Huma Abedin. I mean, now she's looking at obstruction of justice, lying under oath, perjury, lying to the FBI. That's another Title 18 violation. And apparently James Comey is now under pressure to make a deal. It turns out that all 7 of the memos he leaked to that professor, who then went to the media, all 7 were classified. So now he's looking at Title 18 violations. So at some point, somebody's going to crack and say, you think what I'm accused of was bad. Let me tell you what these people over there were doing. And it will all unravel.
Let's hope. Let's hope that happens, Mike.
Absolutely hope that will happen.
We use a purging here and say, well, hey, listen, thank you. Happy New Year, man.
Happy New Year to you, and we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back with another phone call. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the telephones. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Yeah, I wanted to talk about technology, but first, I know you mentioned Friday, I believe, about how all those new other Sears stores are closing. Yes. One of them over in Tom's River in New Jersey is closing. I used to go there as a child. You know, like, so, I mean, people need to realize what's going on here. I mean, the stores are slowly closing.
Yes.
And where are all these people going to go as replacement jobs? You know, I mean, I don't understand what's going on. I mean, I know what's going on, but I don't understand, like, how to stop it now. I mean,
it needs a reset.
You know, Mike,
they've painted the economy into a hopeless corner of debt and cronyism and money junkie greed, and there are some dramatic things that could change the situation, but nobody in a position of power wants to do that. The system works for them. The system is sucking the wealth out of the pockets of the American people, and it's putting it in the pockets of the money junkies, and they are not going to let that change one tiny bit until it all comes crashing down.
You know, Mike, I watched, like, the CESs this week, and they got some really nice things, you know, but there's a lot of things I don't like LG showing off these robots.
Yes.
Where, I don't know if you saw it, but these robots with these weird digital smiley faces that bring people their food in hotels, and they bring your luggage, and they have one that has like a basket for groceries. Now, where are those people? Not the basket with groceries, but where's the people who bring your food and the luggage up? Where are they going to get their jobs from? You know, I don't understand, like, why they should not allow. I mean, progress is one thing, but they should not allow to where it takes people's jobs away at this point. You know, because
I absolutely agree with you. We're headed to a world where we're going to have shopping malls filled with robot clerks and cashiers standing around with nothing to do because the consumers are still human and they don't have the money to come on in and buy the stuff. This is definitely a wrong direction to be going. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think robots are cool. And I've had some in the past I had fun with. My dog hated them. But this rush toward robotization of human jobs, it's a disaster waiting to happen because you're absolutely right. We've already got 100 million Americans unable to find work for months or years. There's more pressure on the labor market from all the illegal immigrants coming in, the refugees, the special program people. And it's very clear that our government is totally unconcerned. Our government is totally unconcerned because they've gone over to the side of the money junkies. As long as they're getting their goodies, their expensive cars, their houses, and live in the lap of luxury, they think that's the way the world is supposed to be. But obviously, this trend, if it continues, there will be a crash.
But Mike, you said it. Consumers don't have the money, but if there's no consumers to consume, robots are not going to consume. I mean, sure, they got to get fixed, but other robots will fix them. So how is that going to help consumption, with robots?
All right, Dustin,
I'll take the answer off there, Mike.
Okay. We'll be back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Turning over to Europe, and in the context of immigration, apparently the reality of what the open borders are doing to Europe has become so obvious that even attempts by the media to spin it or excuse it away or say just get used to it is no longer working. Germany and France are both reeling under refugee crime waves. Sweden is reeling under a rape epidemic. The welfare costs are huge because the refugees are coming on in. The first thing they do is they sign up for welfare, for free stuff. And still, the globalists are trying to argue for more refugees, more immigration. Bring all those people in, blur the European identity. Because it's one of the key things the globalists need to do, is destroy our individual regional sense of history and identity to make it easier to control us. Now, Pope Francis, boy, half of the stuff he says I really like, and then he goes off and says something just that doesn't even make any sense. Apparently, Pope Francis has once again gone on the warpath against people who want to preserve what is left of Western civilization. In his New Year's address, instead of they're calling it the World Day of Peace instead of the traditional feast day of the circumcision. Pope Francis once again labeled those who want to curb the coercive migration of third world people into Europe as sowers of violence, xenophobic, and that they racially discriminate. And so Pope Francis continued his criticism of immigration opponents as being guilty of demeaning the human dignity due to all sons and daughters of God. Now, a little bit of a reality check here. The vast majority of migrants are Muslim, who are mostly young males. They are not sons and daughters of the Christian God. Well, actually, technically, they're all the same God. It all began with Abraham's monotheistic religion. That's the beginning of Judaism, and then Joshua and his followers split off to become Christians, and then Muhammad and his followers split off to become the Muslims. But there is no doubt that by jamming so many Christians and Muslims together, you're increasing the probability that there will be friction. I mean, the Pope has to understand all these new immigrants coming on in, they're not going to be walking into the cathedrals and throwing change into those wooden bowls. It's just not going to happen. There may be a major upset going on over at the British Prime Minister's home. Apparently, she's going to assert her authority to sack a quarter of her current cabinet. There's telegraphing it's going to be a major reshuffle, although it's expected Boris Johnson, David Davis, Amber Rudd, and Philip Hammond will likely keep their current positions. But Theresa May is starting to feel the pressure over there. A little bit of good news. I'm sure you've seen it all over the independent media. Cliven Bundy and his sons are out of jail. And earlier today, a federal judge basically dismissed all the charges against the Bundys with prejudice. And what that means is the prosecutors cannot bring the case back to court. U.S. District Judge Gloria Navarro said there's going to be no new trial. The federal prosecutor's conduct was outrageous and violated the due process rights of the defendants. So the Bundys won this one. And whoever it was who was coveting their ranch property lost. Now, last week, when we were talking about the snowmageddon that hit the East Coast, as opposed to the iceageddon that's coming in this week, we were talking about over in Baltimore, where their schools are seriously dilapidated and run down, and students were going to school, and the temperature inside the school was like 40 degrees. They were having to sit at their desks with their parkas and their mittens and try and get some schoolwork done. Personally, I would have closed the schools on those days, knowing there was inadequate heat, if any heat at all. The good news is Baltimore residents started up a GoFundMe to buy heaters for these classrooms. And so that shows you what the community can do when the community gets together. And it's one of the more wonderful things about the Internet is it does allow the community to organize itself to a much higher degree than ever before. And we don't need to be as dependent on the government to organize us. We can organize ourselves. There are natural leaders just walking around here. They'll pull this stuff together. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Over in Great Britain, university scientists are considering what they're calling a vaccine against fake news. And no, this is not chemical in a needle they shoot into you. They're just using the phrase vaccine. What they're trying to do is develop a teaching curriculum for media awareness by the media consumer. They're reteaching the lost art of critical analysis. And what they're basically planning to teach, it's not in the schools yet, is basically how to recognize false and misleading stories posted to social media. I'd say that would be very good if it works, because everybody online, you do have to be skeptical. There's a lot of lying going on out there, much of it by our own government. Okay, here's another one from the category of the kind of people who run your government. Apparently, a former attorney with the IRS Office of Professional Responsibility has pled guilty in U.S. District Court to conspiracy to distribute over 500 grams of methamphetamine. And apparently this attorney, Jack Vitayanan, was arrested in February, I guess last year, on charges he conspired with people in Arizona and Long Island to distribute methamphetamine over a young number of years. Talk about Breaking Bad. For real life, Breaking Bad here. Last week we were talking about this horrible tragedy where there were these two players on Call of Duty playing over the network. One got angry with the other and swatted him, which means he called police near the home of his target and said, I'm in my home, I have a gun, I've got gasoline all over, I'm going to end it all. So the SWAT team shows up to this innocent man's home, based on the phony phone call. The man opens the door and he's shot dead. Now the police are saying he made a threatening move toward his belt, the usual excuse. Fortunately, they found the guy who made the phone call, Tyler Ray Barris. He's 25 years old, lives in Los Angeles, and apparently this is his thing. He's been linked to many other hoax calls in Los Angeles and elsewhere before what happened in Kansas. And he even had a reputation for helping others gain revenge on rival players, making fake bomb threats and other hoaxes. And he's going to jail, as well he should. So let's talk about human-caused global warming, which Al Gore has now rebranded to the climate crisis. It's a crisis now. You better give me your money in the next 10 minutes or it's all over. We're all doomed. It is snowing in the Sahara Desert for the second winter in a row. Now, prior to last year's snowfall, it was 40 years ago they had any snow in the Sahara. Now we've had 2 winters back-to-back snow in the Sahara Desert. Now, the cyclone, the snowstorm, has left, but it's dragging in behind it extremely cold air. And so the temperatures are dropping all over the eastern seaboard. Mount Washington in New Hampshire is the second coldest place on Earth as of this morning. Now, one climate scientist has stepped out from the crowd to acknowledge there's a cold crisis coming, and he's basing it on the theory that there is a 230-year solar cycle. Because we've only been able to observe the sun scientifically for 100 years, it still needs confirmation. But he's saying the new one starts this year. And apparently this guy, John L. Casey, has been 100% accurate over the last 10 years on predictions of temperatures here on Earth. But the carbon Nazis are not giving up. They're still trying to figure out some way they can convince you the Earth is warming, it's your fault, and you will atone by giving them your money and your obedience. And as you know, one of the big scare stories that we were seeing back in the 1990s when all of this was being fanned out, the ocean levels will rise, the coastal cities will be inundated, the polar bears will drown. Reality check, polar bears can swim. They can even float while asleep. And overall, ocean levels have not been rising. New York is still New York, Boston is still Boston, Los Angeles is still Los Angeles. So a couple of Dutch scientists have come out with a new theory. Yes, the ice and snow and the glaciers and the Arctic caps, they're all melting. They're pouring water into the ocean. But instead of sea levels rising, the floor of the ocean is sinking under the new weight from the water. Now, what is the ocean floor made of? Well, there's obviously a lot of scintillant material, sand, and organic debris. But the ocean floor is made of hardened volcanic bedrock. And it goes all the way down to the Earth's core. The idea that the Earth's oceans are seeing the bottom start to sink is flatly kind of ridiculous. And it shows how desperate they are to keep this fraud going just a little bit longer, because that is what it is. It's a snow job that they've been doing. And none of their doom and gloom predictions have come true, so they just come up with another reason why you should go on believing. Don't think, don't analyze, just believe. We'll tell you. Trying to keep their funding going, trying to emerge from this with their reputations intact. When you look at how many people committed to this hoax, Al Gore himself, Michael Mann, Hadley Climate Research Unit, Penn State, NASA, NOAA, all over the world. They've got a real problem. Everybody around them knows that to be the most generous, they were flat out wrong. That's bad for the credibility of a scientist. To be least generous, they were all going to cash in on this. They were all going to invest in carbon trading brokerages or green energy projects. By the way, there's a video on whatreallyhappened.com about one of these wonderful little windmills bursting into flames and exploding. All right, let's talk about computers. There's a lot going on with the computers. And basically, over at OpenBSD, Durat is now saying the handling of these CPU bugs, disclosures, was incredibly bad. Because apparently Tier 1 companies got word of these bugs on the CPU chips quite a bit before it was made public. That's not responsible disclosure. It's selective disclosure. And basically, everyone below Tier 1 just got screwed out of this. Now, as you know, Microsoft has rushed out a patch to fix Spectre. And it was known ahead of time that on some of the computers, the performance hit might be as hard as 30%. It turns out, in a few cases, it's 100%. Microsoft's patch to fix Spectre is bricking some AMD PCs. So this thing is just getting worse and worse and worse. Athlon-powered machines in perfect working order before the patch just will not work after it. The patch does not create a recovery point, so you can't do a rollback. And sometimes the machines come out where you can't even get to the rollback, to the system restore. And apparently even reinstalling the entire operating system does not seem to help. Frankly, at this point, the risk from a bad patch seems to be more dangerous than cybercrime. It's like, turn off the automatic updates before you get killed. All right, Intel has already been hit with 3 major lawsuits over the meltdown bug. And it's 3 different class action lawsuits, because there's a lot of computers out there. Here's the part that really raises a gigantic question mark. Qualcomm has confirmed that its processors have the same security vulnerability disclosed last week in Intel, ARM, AMD, and IBM CPU cores. Okay, this doesn't sound like a bug. There are simply too many chip makers who have this same facility on the chip that allows outsiders in past all your software security. I think this is actually an NSA backdoor. For the same functionality to show up in all of these chips from all these different companies, that can't be an accident. It can't be error. Okay, now apparently Kfir Cohen, a security researcher from Google's cloud security team on Wednesday, disclosed a vulnerability in the FTMP of AMD's platform security processor, dedicated processor for security. It's got a flaw. This resides on its 64-bit x86 processors and provides administrative functions similar to the management engine in Intel chipsets. And again, these things just have all these holes. I think it's deliberate. If you have a Western Digital MyCloud network attached storage device, you're going to have to learn how to update its operating system, because researcher James Burskay has discovered a dozen different models were sold at the store with a hard-coded back door. In other words, there is a login and password that's literally burned into the machine. Can't be. It's in the operating system, and it lets anyone log in as user MyDlink BR Ion Ying with the password ABC12345CBA. And another friendly reminder: if you're running a router in your home, or if you got one for Christmas, change that default password. That'll help keep some of the nasties out. Now, as you know, Amazon's Alexa is one of these in-home assistants that you talk to, and it will do things for you. It's part of the Internet of Things, where if you have the appropriate up-to-date appliances, you can voice command them. And apparently, Amazon's Alexa can now control microwave ovens and will soon expand to conventional ovens. Gee, what could go wrong with Alexa listening to everything said around it? We'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. So we're talking about Amazon's Alexa and how it can now control your microwave oven, eventually your conventional oven. You can see where there might be a problem. There have already been a number of instances where Alexa has overheard conversation in the room that Alexa thinks is directed at the unit and will make mistakes. And it's one thing if Alexa is just, using the Internet of Things to turn lights on and off, but when you talk about an appliance that, if misused, can cause a problem, like a fire, there's an issue. And, of course, allow hackers to come on through and turn on your stove full blast. We're getting decadent with all this technology. I mean, I love technology when it works. I don't need a computer in every single thing in my life. I really don't. And I think, in fact, I hope it's a fad. I think this is not really going to be the wave of the future. It's just another fad to try and get people to buy all brand new appliances, because my old appliance, oh my goodness, it's 4 years old and it won't talk to the computers. Okay. Real quick. All right. Now, Apple is looking at least 26 lawsuits over the issue of purposefully or secretly slowing down the older iPhones. And I can imagine people are very upset. Apple's excuse that it's trying to prolong the battery life as the battery gets older isn't carrying a lot of weight with people. the thought is that Apple is deliberately degrading the older iPhones each time a new iPhone comes on out in order to stimulate sales. So we'll see what's going to happen there. Meanwhile, apparently, there's been another suicide at a factory that produces Apple's iPhones in China. And so a U.S.-based Chinese workers' rights organization is starting to look into that as well. Okay, let's see. I'm reading something somebody just sent me, asking whether the Raspberry Pi is vulnerable to these bugs. All right. Now, as you know, in last August, there was a white supremacist plowed through a crowd of protesters gathered in downtown Charlottesville, Virginia. And the attack injured around 20 people and killed 32-year-old Heather Heyer. And the violent clashes that weekend, and we've seen them all over the country, basically have resulted in Emily Crow's to basically work on a system to try and find hate symbols on Twitter, to just scan Twitter and identify people who are preaching hate. Now that raises an interesting question. Our privacy is protected by the Fourth Amendment. Of course, if you're posting on Twitter, you have no expectation of privacy. But the idea behind this system is they'll be able to identify people who ought to be looked at ahead of these things. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Sherry in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Sherry, are you there?
You were talking about. Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I'm here, but I can't hear you. I mean, I can hear you, but can you hear me?
I hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, good. Well, you were talking about teachers teaching critical thinking to, I guess, to kids. And it got my attention because that's the part of that left side of the brain. If it's critical thinking, that can be controlled. Left brain thinking can be controlled by globalists, the powers that be, whatever. You know, there's been a real push in the last couple of years to define the left brain as a special connection to the force that out there that can produce miraculous results when we connect with the divine. It's the right brain that does. It's the left brain that is. We need it, but it can be controlled. The right brain is intrinsic to our nature. We come in with this natural ability to connect up and get all the answers we need. I just wanted to point that out because when they start telling them the critical thinking is the left brain and that's ego, Mike, it's dangerous because where there's reasoning, there's also the irrational. You know, I've said it before, and where there's logic, there's the illogical. That can be controlled.
I think the model of left brain, right brain, and being able to say definitively the left brain does this and the right brain does that, I think it's kind of fallen out of fashion in current psychology thinking. It sounded good. The media liked to play with it. But I remember many, many years ago when the buzz phrase was the triune brain, which was the limbic system, the neocortex, and the cortex. And they were trying to use that to partition where certain thought was happening. But they're discovered with PET scans that actually different kinds of thinking happen all over the brain. Sherry, I got to let you go for commercials.
Okay,
I got to let you go for commercials.
Okay.
Back with another phone call after these
back.
few words. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we go back to the phone lines here, a little bit of an announcement. You're going to want to stay tuned to John Stedmiller's program because Tom Lacovara will be live with John Stedmiller immediately following my show. And all the charges against the Bundys and its supporters have been dismissed. And apparently more breaking news about all the people charged in connection with events around the ranchers' protests. Apparently, Donald Trump is going to be doing something as well. And we know that the charges against the Bundys themselves were dismissed with prejudice, means they cannot be tried again. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that program here. All right, let's go back to the telephones now. Francis in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha to you both.
Aloha.
There you go, snack bar and all.
Yep.
And good times to Claire as well. When you mentioned about the aspect of improving technology or causing people to want the next best thing on the line as far as technology goes, computerized or who knows what you want to call it for the household, it reminded me of one terrible aspect. Unfortunately, when I go to visit my sister-in-law and her husband's place, they have a fridge, and which is not bad, except for a couple of tweaks I wouldn't go for. One of which is if you have the doors open for maybe 15 seconds to a half minute, it will start making a dinging sound or whatever. Thing is, you've had the doors open for too long and you're letting go of the cold air or whatever's in the fridge that you've left it open for too long. And all of a sudden I end up hearing one of these say, "Oh, you got the doors open too long. You need to close it." And I'm like, shut it. So
that would be my response as well. I don't want my appliances nagging me.
No, I mean, especially if I'm trying to sort through a whole bunch of stuff that's on the shelf that doesn't belong to me to get to what I need to get to. Yes, that's going to take me longer than 30 seconds to try to sort through that. So it's like, it really perturbs me when I think of that. So in a way, I almost dread going for a visit when I do have to deal with that kind of garbage. But apparently, if you're going to be sophisticated, trendy, and sexy about your appliances, well, that's sure one way to do it.
Well,
anyway, have a great one.
All right, thanks an awful lot. I most certainly would not have a refrigerator with a feature like that. The only time I would like an appliance to sound a buzzer or a bell is if something is going wrong that requires my intervention. And leaving that refrigerator door open doesn't ramp up to it, mostly because the door is on a spring return to close, or at least ours is. It's like her. I'll go into the refrigerator. Sometimes I have to move a lot of stuff around to get what I want. Really, our technology is getting decadent, and I think we should maybe move toward simpler, more elegant, better, easier to use in the future. Caller into the show earlier was talking about the Consumer Electronics Show, and apparently LG was showing off these robots to replace human workers in hotels, airports, and supermarkets. Now, LG said these are concept robots, which means they're demonstrators to see what interest is out there. They are not yet for sale. In fact, the LG spokesman said they're a long way from ready to go public. But again, I think we're heading down a very troublesome road here. If we want this economy to come back, if we want the economy to revive, us ordinary people out here have to be able to trade our skills and labor for decent wages and salaries to pump back into the system. That's just a reality. Every time a store fires their staff and replaces them with automation, that's somebody else's customers who are no longer going to be able to be customers. Anybody who thinks about this realizes this can only lead to another economic crisis down the road. But the problem with money junkies is they think in the next quarterly report, and past that, they really don't care. Especially the executives who are getting close to retirement. Just go along with the flow, go along with this. It's going to be somebody else's problem. Now, as you know, Tesla is unfortunately dealing with some problems, financial problems. Not a lot of people buying their cars because they are pricey, and people just don't have the money. Other issues are the availability of a charging station and the fact that Tesla's current battery takes a long time to charge. They are nice cars, though. But they've got competition. And Byton in China has just unveiled their car. They describe it as more intelligent than humans. I'm sure that's marketing hype. It's estimated to cost at $45,000. It has a 300-mile range, facial recognition, which I hope works better than Apple's, and a 50-inch dashboard touch screen. That's a lot of touch screen. And it also has gesture recognition, where you can have a gesture that controls things in the car. Level 3 autonomous features, and apparently Byton is saying it's a crossover SUV, will get more than 300 miles on a charge, and will charge quickly. So apparently they're getting hold of that new battery breakthrough from, I think it was Toshiba came up with this new breakthrough in the batteries. So they're going to roll them out next year, 2019, in China. They'll be here in the United States in 2020. So that will be kind of cool. Now, as you know, Germany recently passed an online hate speech law. And the law was meant to curtail online hate speech, specifically directed against the Muslims. But according to Germany's top-selling and most popular newspaper, Bild, the new German law is actually stifling free speech and making martyrs out of anti-immigrant politicians whose posts are being deleted. See, that's it. If you oppose George Soros' open borders policy, that's hate speech under this German law. And the law took effect on the 1st of January, and they can impose fines of up to 50 million euros. That's $60 million on sites that fail to remove hate speech promptly and threatens the profitability of such social media giants as Twitter and Facebook. And apparently it is not popular with the German people as well. The sentiment is, spare us the thought police. Now, let's get back to Jeff Sessions and his war on marijuana. I think he's doing it to help protect the profits of the alcohol and tobacco industry. I think he's doing it visibly to make it look like he's actually behaving like an attorney general, even as he continues to run what appears to be more protection for the Clintons and their cronies. But he's basically waging war on cannabis, trying to force the federal prosecutors to go into the states that have decriminalized or legalized marijuana, either medically or recreationally, and start imposing federal law on them. At the same time, apparently, the Department of Justice has granted the manufacturer of fentanyl a monopoly on synthetic tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the intoxicating portion of the plant. So what we're seeing here really is they're getting rid of the natural plant of marijuana while getting ready to sell you a bottled version of it for money. And we have seen this process for many, many years in this country. Take away something that people can make for themselves, force them to buy it from a corporation. And that is what appears to be happening here. Now, out in Colorado, the U.S. attorney there is saying that there will be no changes on the marijuana enforcement. Colorado's top federal prosecutor is saying they will not alter their approach to enforcing marijuana. So this is a contentious issue. And again, if we have any rights at all, we have a right to decide what goes in and does not go into our body. And I understand there are dangerous drugs out there, including at your pharmacy. But I think if a person wants to smoke an intoxicant or drink an intoxicant, that's their choice. That's freedom, as long as they do so responsibly and don't hurt anybody else. But we're seeing these ridiculous laws being passed. Can't grow food on your own property. Can't collect rainwater on your own property. You have to buy water from the water company. You have to buy food from the supermarket. It's this driving down the American people to a situation of total dependence on the corporate supply structure. And where we have the danger, if the economy really does collapse, that supply structure is going to be gone, and Americans are not going to be prepared to fend for themselves. We're going to take a phone call. Kevin from West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. What's on my mind is the Bundy thing, and also Steve Bannon's on my mind. Bundy's, about their decision being thrown out of the courts. Absolutely think that's a great thing. You know, the devil's in the details, and they probably did do some crimes, but what they're being charged with, I'm glad to see it thrown out, because it shows to me there's a little semblance of the judiciary system working somewhat.
Yes.
Not all the way, but somewhat.
Okay. I agree with you. That was the right decision to do. The Bureau of Land Management has been exceeding its authority because of the enclave clause of the Constitution.
That and what is it? Where they the Native American Antiquities Act, where they can just grab and seize land. Steve Bannon.
Yes.
I called in about this a while ago, and my warning was you're going to see the alt-right, alternative media starting to fracture and infight a little bit. I feel personally betrayed by Bannon because I was a supporter of his, and he's one of the ones that got me on the Trump train. And I greatly feel disappointed and greatly feel personally like, you know, I'm taking this personal. I think he's a traitor. I do. I don't know what your thoughts on that is. I mean, I know the book's fake, but or is this some type of 3D chess that him and Trump are playing to get people? But I hate to see this infighting with Breitbart. I mean, regardless or not, he's got to go, or there's going to be no Breitbart.
I agree with that as well, and I think the problem here is most ordinary people like you and I, you cannot really appreciate how egotistical people in high positions can get. I saw a lot of it in Hollywood, okay? And I think in this case, Steve Bannon let his ego get the better of him. I mean, he was rising to the peak of power in this country. He was inside the White House. He was being allowed to sit in on cabinet meetings, and then all of a sudden, he gets fired. And I think he just allowed himself to let his wounded ego take over. And it may be during that particular time period that Michael Wolff interviewed him. And because it just doesn't make any sense that Bannon would do this, there's no gain for him. It was damaging to Trump. It was damaging to Bannon, and Bannon has apologized, but too little too late. But I see this more as a sign of emotional behavior rather than a rational, well thought out operation of some kind.
One of the other questions that I had, and this was just a thought, and I'll leave it at that, is he paid opposition by Hillary?
Well, it's hard to see what Hillary would gain by paying Steve Bannon to go on the attack. I mean, I certainly think that's probably where the book itself came from. But Hillary is, if she runs again, and I think she's thinking about it, she can't run until 2020. So it's a little too early for this kind of stunt. Normally you want to do this kind of smear job just before the election, like where they had that $700,000 they gave to that feminist attorney to find women to accuse Donald Trump of sexual assault. That was right before the election. That's where you time these things.
And with Hillary, too, Uma, her cousin, that's one step away from Hillary's bedroom. So I wonder if the precedent's been set there, you know, and the attack dogs are getting ready to go after Clinton Foundation. I hope. I keep having my hopes up, but, you know, we'll see, right?
We'd all like to see it happen, but again, you need to understand that at the core of all of these people, there is that CIA gun and drug running and other corruption, including the Clinton Foundation, and who knows what else that has stayed off the radar. Plus, what appear to be a whole bunch of murders. And if all of that were to come on out, the American people would immediately reject the federal government and it would collapse like the Soviet Union. I think that's going to happen. The only question is when. But until it actually does happen, you can count on this government to just do everything it needs to do to protect itself and to keep lying to you and trying to convince you that the federal government is an essential necessity for your continued life and well-being, which I don't agree with. We don't need a government that's anywhere near this large. This government absorbs. If we had back the wealth this government absorbs from us, we'd all be sitting pretty. There wouldn't be any homeless or hungry people in the streets.
Totally, absolutely agree. I mean, it's slavery by dependency is exactly what it is. It's a high-tech form of being put on the plantation.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
I mean, you know, I've told you before, I'm blind. I mean, and I'm dependent on $733 a month for Social Security. I wish I didn't have that. I wish I could get out and get a job and do something because I know I can be productive. But here I am, you know, one of these people that has, I mean, I don't have to take the handout, but it does help. But, you know, that's the type of average everyday Americans that are struggling in this country.
Well, like I said, if we had back most of that money that the federal government takes from us to give to Israel, to give to the war machine, to give to Wall Street, there would be plenty of money to help our disadvantaged citizens. There wouldn't be homeless, there wouldn't be hungry. People who have had some kind of an accident would be taken care of. But there's no money left. Anyway, listen, Kevin, I got to let you go, and we'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today here. A lot of people are wondering what's going on with illnesses, vaccines. A lot of people have yet to come to the realization that the current medical industrial complex is really all about the money. And if you want proof of that, let's look at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which presents itself as an agency of the U.S. government, but in point of fact, it is not. CDC is listed as a business on the U.S. Stock Exchange. You can buy stock in the CDC. There's a Dun & Bradstreet report about it. They're a for-profit business, and most of their business is coming from these vaccine manufacturers. This is going to get us on to this flu that's going around. And it is a nasty one. It just seems to linger on. Claire's still dealing with it. And it's jamming emergency rooms in California and across the country. This thing is nasty. It is putting people in the hospital. It is killing people. And so if you start to run a fever, get to your care provider. Don't be brave and say, I'm tougher than it is, because the virus is going to come back and say, no, you are not. That's what happened with Claire. She delayed getting adequate care, and she had the flu, and it turned into bronchitis, almost turned into pneumonia, and came very close to going into the hospital. She is much better today. We'll probably be on the show on Friday. But I put this out here because it is a nasty one. It took everybody by surprise. And it stands in sharp contrast to back in 2009 when the media was full of the new swine flu threat. I called it the when pigs fly flu because the genome of that pathogen combined elements from porcine, avian, and human sources. Kind of hard to think about how that got all mixed up together. And, of course, the makers of Tamiflu made a lot of money out of it. And in the end, that flu in 2009 actually turned out to be rather mild. This one is very serious. I have heard estimates of the effectiveness of the current flu shot on this flu going from 10% to 0. So please, if you start to feel ill, if you start to run a fever, go and see your doctor or get to your nearest urgent care, and certainly don't walk around the neighborhood spreading it to other people. But apparently it did spike sharply in late December, which is when we had it, and it's spreading all over the place here. Okay, for those of you who use the Raspberry Pi little tiny Unix computers, of which I'm one of them. Apparently, because of the architecture of the Raspberry Pi, it is immune to the Spectre and Meltdown backdoors. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Remember to stay on this dial. Listen to John Stedmiller. He's got a lot of important information about the Bundy case. So you're going to want to hear this. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.